Sarah and Angelina Grimke. Sisters Against Slavery. In the early 1800s in South Carolina, slavery plantations were very common, especially in wealthier families. Sarah and Angelina Grimke grew up in one of these wealthier homes, but left it all in their 20s to fight against a principle they had been raised on. This principle was that those with dark skin were of less value and were meant to be treated as slaves. Sarah and Angelina both felt passionate about the need for justice and change. These sisters took a stand in history, not only for the right of the slave, but for the rights of all women. They used their talents of persuasive public speaking to bring women into the abolitionist movement and to write letters, including Letters of the Equality of the Sexes and Appeal to the Christian Women of the South, both trying to rally support for abolition and women's rights.
Slavery was a millstone about my neck and marred my comfort from the time that I can remember myself. Sarah Grimke.
Sarah, the sixth child born to John Fosherog Grimke and Mary Smith Grimke, and Angelina, the youngest of the 14, were born 13 years apart in an aristocratic family in South Carolina. Their father, a plantation owner, was a lawyer and a politician, and had also served as a lieutenant colonel in the Revolutionary War. It is thought that he had told Sarah that if she were a boy, she would have been an amazing lawyer just like him. She likely would have, because of her great persuasive and argumentative skills. She demonstrated her passion for justice when she argued that women should also be taught Greek, Latin, philosophy, and law like men. Slavery was another thing that severely upset both sisters. Sarah had a personal slave who she treated well and eventually illegally taught to read. Though the two became very close, a short time after, she died of an unspecified disease. Being a religious Episcopal family, they both believed that slavery was not only an awful treatment of humans, but a sin that they did not want their family or friends to participate in.
If law commands me to sin, I will break it. If it calls me to suffer, I will let it take its course unresistingly. Angelina Grimke.
When Sarah was 27 in 1819, she accompanied her father on his trip to Philadelphia, where she was impressed by the Quaker way of life. One aspect of the Quaker faith that appealed to Sarah was the fact that women were able to preach to congregations of both genders. She hoped to become a minister herself. This training helped her to become more comfortable with public speaking in front of both genders. After returning to the South, she taught slave Sunday school and illegally taught some slaves to read. She returned to Philadelphia 2 years later with the hope of joining the Society of Friends, a Christian Quaker group who were against the practices of slavery. When Angelina was 24, she decided to join Sarah in Philadelphia and become a teacher. Her plan to teach was never realized, and neither was Sarah's plan to be a minister, but they instead devoted themselves to the anti-slavery cause.
I know nothing of man's rights or women's rights. Human rights are all that I recognize. Sarah Grimke.
After arriving in Philadelphia in 1829, Angelina decided to join the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. She began attending meetings where men encouraged women to be involved in the abolitionist cause. She wrote a letter of support to William Lloyd Garrison, who was an abolitionist leader. Her letter was unexpectedly published in The Liberator, making her a face of the abolitionist cause. The news spread to her hometown, upsetting many of her friends and family in Charleston. 7 years later, Angelina wrote and published a pamphlet called An Appeal to the Christian Women of the South. Because of its anti-slavery message, all copies were destroyed by Southern postmasters. The same year, Sarah wrote a similar pamphlet called Epistle to the Clergy of the Southern States. The sisters were warned not to return to Charleston or face imprisonment. Slaveholders felt threatened by Angelina's powerful words in her pamphlet. She wrote, "But perhaps you will be ready to query, why appeal to women on this subject? We do not make the laws which perpetuate slavery." To this, I reply, I know you do not make the laws, but I also know that you are the wives and mothers, the sisters and daughters of those who do. And if you really suppose you can do nothing to overthrow slavery, you are greatly mistaken. In 1835, Angelina was appalled by the violence of the rioting against abolitionists and African Americans in New York, Philadelphia, and in her hometown of Charleston. She responded to this gruesome negativity by sending William Lloyd Garrison a letter of support, saying, quote, "The ground upon which you stand is holy ground. Never, never surrender it. If you surrender, the hope of the slave is extinguished. This is a cause worth dying for." He realized the power of her words and, without her permission, published her letter for all abolitionists to see. Though she was embarrassed, this event made her a public figure in abolition. In the start of the year 1837, Sarah and Angelina Grimke toured New York State, giving powerful speeches to fellow abolitionist men and women. Angelina was quickly acknowledged as one of the strongest female orators in the abolitionist cause, often stronger than men in the abolitionist cause. In Poughkeepsie, New York, the sisters spoke in front of their first mixed-gender audience. At the time, this was thought of as promiscuous behavior for women. Nevertheless, their tour was successful. After going to the Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women in 1837, they toured New England, again speaking to mixed-gender audiences. Though there were still those who believed women speaking to men was not acceptable, Angelina wrote, quote, "It is amazing that the way has been opened for us to address mixed audiences. We abolition women are turning the world upside down." Angelina Grimke. In July of 1837, in Amesbury, Massachusetts, two men challenged Angelina on her right to speak publicly and on her thoughts on slavery. This was one of the first public debates between a man and a woman in the United States. Though her opponent had the upper hand because of his gender, it is recorded by spectators that Angelina Grimke kept her cool and, quote, brushed away the cobwebs that the man threw at her. Later, in 1838, Sarah and Angelina Grimke came upon Catherine Beecher, a prominent speaker who believed women shouldn't be permitted to public speak and that African Americans could be kept as slaves in the South. The sisters responded with a series of letters published in Letters to Catherine Beecher. Later that year, Sarah wrote Letters on the Equality of the Sexes, stating that African Americans' fight for freedom was related to women's fight for equality. This writing appeared in the New England Spectator, with its powerful demand, "All I ask our brethren is that they take their feet from off our necks and permit us to stand upright on that ground which God designed us to occupy." In the same month, the Congressional General Association published the Pastoral Letter that stated against women leaving their proper sphere. However, crowds still gathered all over New England to hear the sisters speak. "I want to be identified with the Negro. Until he gets his rights, we will never get ours." Angelina Grimke. Later, Angelina married a famous abolitionist man named Theodore Weld. Sarah never married. Sarah Grimke died at age 81 in 1873. Angelina died 6 years later, after being paralyzed for many years due to strokes. Though the two never lived to see their huge effect on our day, they saw the beginning of the women's rights movement and the end of slavery. We can never overlook the stand they took in history because they are the ones responsible for our country's future. A black man serving as our president for 8 years, a woman being the official representative of a national party. The risk they took of defying their parents and all of their hometown, speaking and debating men and women, cannot be forgotten. They lived privileged lives and traded their luxury, becoming outsiders, to free people they didn't even know. Sarah took a stand by leaving the proper sphere of a woman and being the first woman in the United States to write a comprehensive feminist manifesto. Angelina took a stand by debating men and women, despite the ways others would treat her. She was the first woman to speak before a legislative body in the United States. They boldly took chances and risked their lives to prove that all men and women are truly created equal. The future is bright if you take a stand like the Grimke sisters.